So, Sarah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. And I can hear you. And you're recording your end, too, which normally doesn't happen.
A wild event.
I know. We didn't like you. You're the one, Sarah Leibovitz, for our listeners, is the one who put that whistling, the incredible mind behind the whistling tumbleweed sound and the all by myself a couple of weeks ago when I was in the same situation. Okay, Sarah, I want to ask, this is my idea for today to capture the vibe of the news day we're having. I want to prop the studio door open. I want to start down the hall yelling. And so they hear me, the listeners hear me down the hall. I run through the open door and I crash into the mic. What do you think about that?
You know, I like the creativity. I like the drive.
Okay.
I don't want to offend anyone that works at this fine establishment.
Like business development down the hall?
But we do have some older people who also work here that I think that might be like the last thing they hear before like the shock sends them into a heart attack.
Oh
so
my God.
Maybe we should skip.
You called BizDev old.
I'm not saying BizDev in particular. We welcome employees of all ages.
Oh my God. There is no age discrimination at KUOW. It's time for Sound Politics. You're listening to Sound Politics, and I'm Scott Greenstone, and there is so much happening on this Thursday before a holiday. We had a whole episode, and we just balled it up and threw it in the trash. Here's where we are on the DC level as I record this at 12:30 p.m. on Thursday. The so-called One Big Beautiful Bill has passed the U.S. House again and appears to be headed to the president's desk to become law. President Donald Trump was personally calling and talking face-to-face with House Republican holdouts yesterday, including, reportedly, Central Washington's own Congressman Dan Newhouse, who went to the White House and was apparently persuaded because he voted yes today, along with Washington's other Republican, Michael Baumgartner, who you heard on the show last week. All of Washington's Democrats voted no. Now, we have talked a lot about the big, beautiful bill on this podcast and heard from Democrats and heard from Republicans, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more in the weeks to come. So I want to turn to some other breaking news here in this Washington. Now, this is about a King County elected official, but I think the story has lots of resonance outside of King County. Wednesday night, the King County Assessor was arrested. His name is John Arthur Wilson, and he is running for county executive, an open seat where he would run the Seattle area metro system, county jail, sheriffs. Wilson was arrested for allegedly violating a restraining order against his ex-fiancee. Sources tell me he was outside her home in Seattle when he was arrested. So I spoke to Assessor Wilson last month, and Libby and I talked about it on her other show, Soundside, last week. So we thought we would rebroadcast that conversation with Libby today. And I think it still, holds up because even if you don't live in King County and you aren't voting in the upcoming August primary election, it surfaces lots of important questions about due process and how and when elected officials are held accountable. So here's that conversation.
Voters will pick a new King County executive this November, and the race has taken a dramatic turn as candidate and current King County Assessor John Wilson has been repeatedly accused of stalking and harassment. Last month, his ex-fiancee and domestic partner Lee Keller was granted a second restraining order against him. Members of the King County Council have called on Wilson to resign, which he has rebuffed. Wilson has vehemently denied all allegations of domestic violence and stalking. He says he and Keller have a stormy relationship and that many of her allegations are incorrect.
That's been one of the great challenges is with so many of the things that she has filed, they are riddled with conflated and takes on things that you go, that's simply not true.
That clip is from an interview Wilson did with KUOW politics reporter Scott Greenstone, also my co-host on Sound Politics. And he joins me now. Scott, thanks for coming on and give us more context on this, I would say, pretty messy story, what it's become.
Yeah, it's been a weird one. Yeah. Thanks for having me, though.
Yeah, of course. For those not closely following their county assessor, who is John Wilson and what does he do for the county?
Yeah, so John Arthur Wilson was a reporter at the Seattle Times. I think he even worked for KUOW on and off, he says, in the past. But his job now is he is the county assessor, which basically he manages the appraisers. And obviously they have the very important job of determining what taxable property value is on every parcel of land in King County. That forms the basis for so much of our government. So it is an important job. And in some way, I mean, in many ways, it's completely separate from everything that is being alleged right now and coming up in this race for county executive, which is a higher office that he is running for.
So there have been a lot of accusations against him, many of them from court filings by his ex-fiancee. Can you just lay them out for us first, Scott?
Yes. So he had an on-again, off-again relationship with his ex-fiancee, Lee Keller, who is also a reporter and is now like a public relations consultant. They were together for years. And last year, when they broke up, she alleges that he stalked her, that he tracked her vehicle, that he showed up at an undisclosed address that she had, purposefully not shared with him, and that he entered and kissed her against her will. He denies that. And then in April and May of this year, he allegedly wouldn't stop calling her. He even used his county phone when she blocked his personal one. He contacted, allegedly, her son and her sister. She included screenshots of texts, including one where she said, all caps, "Leave me alone." And he responded, "Never." And most recently in some court documents, she alleges that he came to her house several times last month in violation of the order and has violated the order even as recently as this month.
And what has John Wilson said in response to all of these allegations?
He has denied some. He has said others are exaggerated or missing context. So, for instance, after the temporary restraining order was granted in May, the two of them both attended the funeral of a local elected official. You might remember Senator Bill Ramos, who passed away unexpectedly earlier this year. John says he saw that Lee was there and he left. And after that, he says that Lee contacted him and suggested they meet up, and they did, and she agreed to withdraw the order. That's been something he's brought up a lot. So then he says she reneged on that agreement after she asked him for money and he said no. He says he's, given her lots of money. And just to be clear, she says that that's not true. They, had a shared account. They both shared expenses. Her response is, "I did feel bad that John had to leave Senator Ramos's service and started doubting my decision, which I'm now learning is common for women trying to leave controlling relationships. It was a knee-jerk reaction to smooth it all over, make him happy, and avoid retaliation. However, I ultimately chose not to withdraw the restraining order because I was quickly reminded of the behaviors that called for the order in the first place."
And we did have maybe another example of that because the temporary restraining order you're talking about right now, which is still in effect, is the second restraining order. The first one came from May 2024, which afterwards expired, and the couple reconciled after that. And we're going to get to that, more on that in just a second. But this is, again, the second restraining order. So what's the response been like from other elected officials like the King County Council, Scott? Because these are really serious allegations. And again, there is a big election coming up this November for the executive seat.
Yeah, which he's running for. Yeah, they have essentially, called on him to step down. The county council has, the interim county executive, the mayor of Seattle, a state senator, saying that, they have, no confidence in him and his ability to do the job. Some of them have also called on him to end his run for county executive.
And we mentioned this is the second restraining order that Wilson has had served by his ex-fiancee, Lee Keller. What happened after the first one?
Yeah, so this was a story that first broke in January, but at the time, there wasn't a lot of outcry about it because, to rewind and talk about the way that the two have reconciled in the past, there was a restraining order filed last year. It was allowed to lapse after the two reconciled and didn't show up to court. So the only one who really called out John Arthur Wilson, as far as I could see, was County Council member Claudia Balducci at the time, who I should mention is also running for county executive. She called on him to step down. The King County Democrats called for more investigation into the allegations, particularly the allegations that he used his public office, like his county phone, or potentially other county resources to call her and stalk her, allegedly.
But at the time when it was first reported in January, Lee Keller and John Wilson were back together, and she was backing his race for King County executive. And she gave quotes to the Times that were supportive, saying that relationships can be messy. Mm-hmm. We are happily engaged to be married. We are planning a wedding. Now that since fell apart, and then the second order came about in May 2025. So at this point, it seems like the King County Council, looking at this, they've held a vote of no confidence in Keller. With one person in abstention, it was an 8-0 vote. That was June 10th. And that included votes from two of the competitors for Wilson in the race for executive. That's Gurmai Zahalai and Claudia Balducci, as you mentioned. We're going to get to more on that in a second. But first, if the King County Council says the assessor should resign, why is he still in the job? Like, who has the power to actually get him out of that job?
Yeah, only the voters, actually, because county assessor, whether you remember it or not, you probably voted for him at some point in the past, or he's often run,
or at least saw him on your ballot.
Yeah, or at least you saw him on your ballot. He is elected by the voters, and he can only be removed through a recall election or losing re-election. Nobody has the authority to remove him, at least at the moment, with what the allegations are.
And right now, what's the current status with the restraining order between Lee Keller and John Wilson?
Yeah, it is still in effect. He moved to have it dismissed, but the judge did not grant him that. So on Monday, there will be a court hearing where a judge will decide whether to extend or dismiss the order.
Wilson running for King County executive has, to make a case to the voters here. Obviously, this has taken up a lot of the oxygen in his campaign, but what's his platform? I mean, why is he running for executive? What's the argument to vote for him?
He's kind of running to the right of the two front runners. He's a Democrat, but he wants more sheriff's deputies. He, potentially wants to take funding away from the King County Regional Homelessness Authority and put it toward that. But yeah, as we've said, these allegations have really ballooned and I think sort of overshadowed his campaign. And I should also say he's not, really considered a front runner. Claudia Balducci on the King County Council, who we've talked about, and Gurmai Zahalai, another King County Council member, have both raised way more than him. And I saw a recent private poll from a campaign that showed he's only at 7% polling-wise. So, I mean, that's not nothing, but it's not a front runner.
The Seattle Times editorial board recently accused the King County Council of, quote, taking the low road when it came to John Wilson. They argue that Wilson has the right to due process here. And they say that Gurmai Zahalai and Claudia Balducci are being self-serving by proposing and voting no confidence against Wilson. I mean, how extraordinary are these actions to have your political rivals basically taking this kind of vote against you? Well,
again, the vote is symbolic. It doesn't carry any legal power. And it's not unheard of for the county council to make a statement like this. I can't help but think of 4 years ago when they stripped then council member Kathy Lambert of her committee leadership as punishment for a mailer her campaign sent out that they condemned as racist. It portrayed council member Zahalai as a socialist puppet master pulling strings behind Lambert's opponent at the time, who ended up beating her. But I bring that all up to say it's not unheard of. And, you mentioned there was an abstention, but even that was the one lone Republican, Reagan Dunn. And he has since, even though he missed the vote, he has joined calls for Wilson to step down. So, we're talking about some bipartisanship here, calling for Wilson to step down.
And what has Wilson said about all of this, about the vote and stuff?
He's said Balducci in particular is just playing politics and trying to use this to further her own campaign.
So why is this a big deal,
Yeah.
Scott? I mean, how would these allegations affect Wilson's job as King County executive, for example, if he were to win? Again, it's a long shot, but if he were to win.
Well, one thing I didn't mention is that Councilmember Balducci has also called for an ombuds investigation into whether or not, John Arthur Wilson used county resources, again, his county phone, things like that, which he denies, I should say. So that there's that question. Was that improper? State Senator Moncadingra brought up in a press conference that if he were county exec, John Arthur Wilson would be in charge of the sheriff's department, which manages resources for survivors of domestic abuse. So there is, that as well.
So Wilson's denied all wrongdoing, as we mentioned. What is his explanation for what's been going on here? He says that he is not responsible for what he's been accused of.
Yeah, it's a little hard to sum up. We talked for an hour.
Yeah, I mean, again, you sat down with him for quite a while to talk about this.
Yeah, we did. And so he seems to be arguing that Lee has mood swings and what he called tunnel vision and just isn't seeing the events the same way he remembers them or is twisting them. But I asked what she has to gain from it, and I didn't get a clear answer other than the implication of money. So here's a quote from him.
Part of what I find difficult is when I read the things in the TRO, I go, that's just not at all how it happened.
The TRO being the temporary restraining order. And he talked about the allegations of domestic violence hitting home because of experiences his family members have gone through. Here's another.
It's taking the very legitimate domestic violence system that we have to protect people, to protect women and even men, and it tarnishes it. For Balducci to say, how dare I be disrespectful to domestic violence women, survivors and that? How outrageous when you don't know a damn thing about my family.
So Lee Keller, his fiance, her lawyer, has essentially argued to me and to other media outlets that none of what he's bringing up is really a conclusive contradiction to the thing that made Lee Keller have to file the restraining order. And her filing, again, is full of screenshots of call after call he made to her. The one just this week has allegations about him coming to her home several times after the order was filed in violation of it, and some public events where he, showed up and came within 1,000 feet of her. So her attorney said on a local radio station, he is waging this campaign against my client. And to be frank, he's going on every station he can to whine and basically cry witch hunt. Keller's not waging a media war. So that's kind of the response, the argument.
And I think you emphasize there that she has a high-profile job herself as a media consultant. And so being public with these kinds of accusations, what does she have to gain, basically, is, what you were asking John Arthur Wilson. He's not stepping down.
No.
He's defiant. He says that this is not true. He is not leaving the race for King County executive. What's next?
So he's on our ballots in August for county executive. And then if he loses, he's up for re-election next year, unless, of course, there is a recall election. But that would take petitions and all that.
So could remain our assessor in King County if he wins that re-election, if he's not the executive.
That's right. So that was Libby and I talking last week, and the update since then is that John Wilson was arrested outside Keller's home on Wednesday night. Keller said through her lawyer that she wouldn't be commenting on, quote, this unfortunate turn of events other than to thank the Seattle police for their quick response last night. According to Keller's filings, just around 2 weeks ago, Wilson had violated the restraining order by coming to Keller's home several times. And he also attended other events that she attended, such as a Downtown Seattle Association annual meeting. And he told me he didn't see her at that event, but a spokesperson for the Downtown Seattle Association said he was registered a number of weeks before the event. And when Keller registered day of, both of them were notified that the other would attend. So all that to say, after recording this, I'm going to head to court to cover his first appearance. You can check for updates at KUOW.org. And that is it for Sound Politics today. This episode was produced by Sarah Leibovitz and Jason Burrows. Our editor is Kat Smith. I'm Scott Greenstone. That was Libby Dankman. And if you care about what you hear here and you want it to stick around forever, no matter what House votes happen or Senate votes happen on rescissions, which is still a question, and that has its own deadline, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, if you want to make sure that no matter what happens with that vote, we stay around, please donate at kuow.org/soundpolitics. And if you have questions or feedback about this show, email us, soundpolitics@kuow.org. We will see you next week. I left my headphones on. Should have taken my headphones off. See you next week.